Hello, and welcome to Causal Foundations. My name is Neftali Weinberger, and today I'll be talking about Simpson's paradox. Let me begin with an example. In June 2020, it was reported that the COVID-19 fatality rate was almost double in Italy than in China. Now you might look at this as providing evidence that the virus was deadlier in Italy than China. But now let me give you an additional piece of information. This chart shows that, within every single age group, the fatality rate was higher in China than in Italy. Take a moment to think about that. Initially, learning someone was Italian made it more probable they'd die. But once you know their age, no matter what age that is, their being Italian now makes it less likely they'll die. To get a sense of what's going on, consider the age distribution of cases in Italy and China. Note that the people who got COVID in Italy were on average much older than those in China. This suggests that rather than the virus being deadlier in Italy, it's simply that learning someone was an Italian COVID case provided evidence of their age, and thus of factors that were causally relevant to survival. The case just considered is an example of Simpson's paradox, a statistical phenomenon in which a probabilistic association obtaining in a population emerges, disappears, or reverses when the population is partitioned into subpopulations. The COVID example is one in which a positive association becomes negative within every subpopulation. But the paradox applies whenever the presence or direction of the population association is different from that in every subpopulation. Simpson's paradox is not a paradox in the sense of being impossible. We've already seen that it can happen, but it is perplexing and serves as a sort of Rorschach test for seeing whether you truly understand the relationship between causation and probability. The initial example already makes it clear why understanding the paradox is crucial for drawing policy conclusions from data. To build some numerical intuitions, let's look at a toy example from Simpson's 1951 paper involving the success rate of a medical treatment where patients are either in the treatment or control group. In the full population, the success rate is identical in the treatment and control groups. Mathematically, we write that the probability of success given treatment is equal to the probability of success given no treatment. Although the treatment is uncorrelated with success in the population, it raises the probability of success in men and also raises the probability of success in women. Remarkably, Simpson's example is a classic case of Simpson's paradox. Before moving on to show how causal analysis clarifies all of this, I want to highlight two more features of these numbers. First, note that the population contains more women than men. Second, note that even though the treatment raises the probability in both groups, the probability of success is higher in men who don't get the treatment than in women who do. So learning that someone received the treatment gives you evidence that they are a woman, and thus less likely to recover, come what may. For those of you who watched the previous episode, perhaps some of this is starting to sound familiar. There I distinguished between causal and merely evidential relevance. Here's a candidate causal model for the medical case. A correlation between treatment and success might be due to T causing S, but it could also be that learning that someone took the treatment provides evidence of their gender, which itself influences success. One way to disentangle causal from merely evidential relevance is by intervening on the treatment, which breaks the arrows going into it. The probability of S given an intervention on T is denoted by the probability of S given due T. Due to gender being a common cause, this distribution will be different from the observational distribution, the probability of S given T. Fortunately, even when one does not intervene, one can infer the effect of T on S by adjusting for M using this equation, which I'll unpack on the next slide. This equation allows you to identify the effect of intervening without actually intervening. Crucially, whether one can identify an effect depends on the details of one's causal model. For further information, check out episode 3. The equation I just presented says that the effect of T on S can be derived as an average of the probabilities of success given treatment in the male and female populations, weighted by the size of those populations. Now, in this particular example, the conditional probabilities in the subpopulations also identify the effects in those subpopulations. This makes it easy to see a more general point, which is that the causal effect in a population is an average over the effects in its subpopulations. I know I'm giving you a lot of technical details, but once you absorb them, you'll be able to sidestep a world of confusion. According to the causal analysis of Simpson's paradox, the reason people are puzzled by the paradox is they conflate standard conditional probabilities with causal ones. While it's possible for a treatment to raise the probability of success in a population, but not in any subpopulations, it's not possible for a treatment to be causally effective in a population, but not in any subpopulations. This follows directly from the effect being an average of those in the subpopulations. Bringing this all together, when people hear that the treatment raises the probability of success, they assume this means that the treatment causes success, ignoring how merely learning someone took the treatment says something about who they are, and that this evidential link also influences the probabilistic relationship. Almost everyone who writes about Simpson's paradox gets it wrong. Here are two misconceptions. The first is that the paradox reveals the dangers of mixing subpopulations, and that the solution to the paradox is to unmix the population by partitioning it using as many variables as possible. The example discussed so far might suggest this, but partitioning is not always the solution. If instead M were an effect of T influencing S, one would not condition on it when identifying the effect of T on S. This model is compatible with any dataset that's also compatible with the earlier model, so whether one should condition on a variable depends on the causal model. Second, there's a persistent belief that Simpson's paradox undermines the objectivity of causation by making causal relationships sensitive to the variables one conditions on. Now, it's true that in our initial example, the effect size differs when one conditions on gender being male or female, but this is because the effect is in fact different in the male and female populations. The different effects do not reflect subjectivity, but rather that one is measuring effects in causally different subpopulations. As a final illustration of Simpson's paradox, I'll consider a paper by Yule and Winship, who critique the benchmarks used in testing for racial discrimination by police. Suppose you're studying whether police discriminate against minorities in stops. You might notice that police stop black drivers more than white ones, but wonder if this could be accounted for by the higher rate of criminality in this hypothetical population. The criminal-based benchmark test corrects for this, and here would be taken to suggest that the rate of stops for black drivers is disproportionately high even once one adjusts for criminality. Yule and Winship provide scenarios revealing that such benchmarks are compatible with any degree of discrimination, as well as its total absence. Benchmarks are just proportions in populations, and Simpson's paradox tells us that those proportions need not say anything about the proportions in subpopulations. Yule and Winship's scenarios should make one hesitant to rely on benchmark tests, and while they explicitly don't present a causal analysis, they do link their discussion to Simpson's paradox, which they explain as follows. When the police behave differently across the strata of some variable, but a researcher's analysis uses data that ignores or aggregates across this distribution, Simpson's paradox threatens to give outcome statistics that are inconsistent with reality. Here we see the first misconception, that the paradox is about mixing or aggregation, as well as the second one that's a threat to objectivity. Further note their claim that it biases benchmark tests. To talk of a test being statistically biased, we need a clear picture of the quantity being measured. Standard conditional probabilities can't play this role, since we know they're not invariant to partitioning. Causal quantities could play this role, though whether due race makes sense is something I'll return to in a future episode. Winship himself is a co-author of the most popular book on causal modeling in the social sciences, which I recommend often. This example thus reveals how even causal experts can make mistakes about the paradox when they're not thinking causally. That concludes today's episode. To summarize, nothing in probability theory rules out Simpson's paradox. The fact that people are so puzzled by it suggests that they're unconsciously interpreting the claim that X raises the probability of Y with the claim that X causes Y. When we deal with genuine causal effects, you can't get Simpson's reversals. a cause in the population has to be the average of those in subpopulations. This matters not just when one wants to intervene, but even when interpreting data, as in the case of racial discrimination. Thank you for listening. For further information, check out the entry on Simpson's paradox in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which I wrote with Jan Sprenger. You can also check out my response to Neil and Winship.